Raise your hand if you've heard about the FCC Spectrum auction. Okay. All right. So we've all looked a little bit at that. This slide here shows you what it looked like after the last Spectrum auction, which was in 2010. And in 2010, everything from 698 to 806 was auctioned off to mobile broadband companies for new services. And we had to vacate that area, of course, back in that time period. So then in 2012, at the bottom part of the Jobs Creation Act that our representatives in the United States Congress passed for us, they snuck in a little part at the end of it that gave the FCC authorization to conduct another spectrum auction in the UHF spectrum, once again to provide more spectrum to the mobile broadband companies who apparently just couldn't get enough. Now, it is kind of interesting as to the way this worked this time around. The first time around, basically they told the TV stations, you're leaving, we're going to give you a new home, we're going to help pay for it, and they did. This time around, there was a little bit more resistance from the National Association of Broadcasters and the TV studios, and so they had, for various legal reasons, to come up with this reverse auction. And the reverse auction was the broadcasters were able to get together first and say, this is the amount of money we want for our spectrum. And then the mobile broadband companies would put forward a forward bid. And if those two things didn't meet, then it would go to another round of auctioning. And so that actually happened a couple times because the initial numbers were not coming together at all. In the beginning, they tried to auction off 126 megahertz. That was what was on the chopping block for the first round. And that would have extended down from 698 megahertz way down past TV channel 37, which is radio astronomy, into the upper 500s. But what happened in that very first round is that the Association of Broadcasters came back with a number around $86 billion, and the mobile broadband companies came up with a number of $20 billion. So those two didn't come anywhere near, so we went to round two. In round two, they shrunk the amount of auction or spectrum that was being auctioned. Those numbers didn't come together. They went to round three. Once again, those numbers didn't come together. And we actually have a timeline of all this on Sure's website. If you look up Incentive Auction Resource Center, it kind of gives you a timeline of everything that happened. We got to round four, which was 84 megahertz. And then we had a successful auction, or they had a successful auction, not really for us wireless microphone users will we consider it successful, but for the broadcasters and the mobile broadband companies, they came up with this agreed number, and 84 megahertz is what was auctioned off, and that has been what we're going to live with. And so that comes down to basically 614 megahertz. 616 megahertz is the end of the chopping block. And I'll show you a slide in a second. There's a little sliver between channel 37 and the beginning of that of 2 megahertz, which is a little guard band area that's in there. So basically what that means is all those TV stations that were in the 600 megahertz area have to transition to new homes in the 500 megahertz area or even upper 400s. The mobile broadband companies, which T-Mobile was the big winner, and this is a real significant difference in this auction and the first auction, they can start using the spectrum that they got in the 600 megahertz area under two conditions. If there's not a TV station already there, they can begin testing and using that, which means as a wireless microphone user, you immediately need to get out of that area, both legally and also for performance, because the signal strength of some of the stuff that they'll be doing in that area will potentially interfere with your microphones. And what's worse for them is that your microphones, our microphones, will potentially interfere with their phones. So T-Mobile is being very aggressive about expanding into this area. They spent $9 billion or something in the auction. They're spending billions of dollars deploying a nationwide network of cell towers and other things, which they've always used other people's networks. So this is a really big thing for them. And you can actually look up, there's some videos online that show their transition plans. Now back to the transition of the TV stations. So for those TV stations that are in the 600 megahertz area, there's 10 assigned phases for them to relocate. And it's basically done by the city that they're in. And those phases start early next year and conclude in the middle of 2020. Here in Dallas-Fort Worth, all of our TV stations are assigned to move between April and the cutoff is June 21st of 2019. At that point in time, those stations will have to relocate their equipment and everything and begin broadcasting on their new assigned stations. At that point, the mobile broadband companies can then begin using that 600 megahertz space. So that means a couple different things for us. Once again, you can't be in the 600 megahertz area once those TV stations leave. Of course, you couldn't be in those TV stations now because there's TV stations there. And the other impact of it is that the wireless microphones have to vacate the TV channels that are currently empty where new TV stations will come in. So what does this mean? We're losing a lot of area in the UHF band and to operate. Now there's a new rule under these this auction that's different than the last one too. It's called co-channel operation, which means as a wireless microphone user, we can co-channel operate our microphones in any area where the measured signal strength of a TV station is beneath negative 85 decibels. So for you guys out here, you're somewhat close to transmitters. You'll have to look and see station by station where that's going to happen. And you know, having scanners is going to be advantageous to everyone moving forward, especially after the TV transition in 2019. Is when that really is going to become important. And I believe in the front pocket of my bag I might have that RF analyzer. We'll show it to y'all a little later, but I have a handheld RF Explorer. I recommend people start to get those, because if you can determine the signal strength of a TV station is beneath negative 85, then yes, you can co-channel operate in that area. Dallas-Fort Worth area drew one of the, I guess the long straw, right? Or the short straw. How's that saying go? Yeah, right. Yeah. We technically, after 2019, will only have 2 empty TV stations to operate in, 15 and 17. However, there's a low-power TV station in 20 and a low-power in 26. And every scan I've ever done in Dallas-Fort Worth, those TV stations, if they stay on the air, they're not protected by this auction, their signal strength is beneath negative 85. So that leads me to run under the assumption that there will be at least 4 TV stations for everyone in this metroplex to operate in. Now, the further you get away from the TV transmitters and those decreased signal strength, the better you are, because there may be some other opportunities to co-channel operate. For example, when I stand in the front yard of my house in Denton, Texas, with a handheld RF Explorer, there's not a single TV station that goes over negative 85. I was down at First Baptist Church Dallas Tuesday, and it's quite the opposite situation there. Every TV station that was on the air was above negative 85. So once again, it depends on your proximity. I mean, if you're in Fort Worth, if you're in Rockwall, if you're in Plano, Frisco, McKinney area, if you're 30 miles south of here, you may have some area to operate in. So once again, scanning is important. All this becomes important because with limited number of TV stations, it means limited number of opportunities to use UHF microphones. So spectral efficiency from digital products will become very important. This kind of shows what we're looking at now. If you can look up there under the new auction, you can see where the wireless mics stop at 608, and then there's a TV channel reserved for radio astronomy. There's a 2 megahertz sliver between the downlink band for the mobile broadband, and then there's a 10 megahertz sliver called the duplex gap between the downlink and uplink band as well. And then you can see where the new services were up there in 2009. That's Verizon, AT&T. Interesting to note, this auction didn't raise as much money as the United States government thought it would. And so Verizon and AT&T sat out this auction pretty much because of all the real estate they, so to speak, bought in 2009, 2010. And so, like I said, T-Mobile was really the big winner here. Some other companies like Comcast and some other people did acquire some spectrum in this area. It remains to be seen what some of those companies plan on doing with it. So far, T-Mobile is the only one that's being very aggressive in deploying. But, one major difference, like I say, just point this out, is the last time around it was a fixed date. After this date, everything changes. We're in a rolling transition based on what city you're in right now. And once again, as soon as T-Mobile starts using their services, or whomever got those that area in 600 megahertz, technically you have to get out. And we suspect that they will probably, and already have been in some areas, issuing letters to wireless microphone users that they're in their spectrum and you need to vacate that spectrum. Don't know if they'll report people to the FCC or be nice and give them a warning first, but technically they can report you to the FCC, and that is a huge fine for operating in that area. So moving forward, that's that downlink uplink band I kind of showed y'all. You can see the circle around it. This kind of zooms in a little bit more. You can see that the guard band and then in the middle of the duplex gap there. So we can actually operate wireless microphones in those areas because there is no other TV signals or mobile broadband, so you can't actually go into that area. There are some restrictions on who can. There's something called licensed users and unlicensed users. Licensed users are anyone who has a Part 74 license from the FCC. You can qualify for that by having at least 50 channels of wireless, anything. Do you have 50 channels of wireless here?
We're close.
Well, they may actually come off that number a little bit. It's in your best interest to get a Part 74 license, and we can talk a little bit more about that later, but that allows you to do some things like register your frequencies. It allows you access to some other areas of spectrum that will open up in the future, plus this duplex gap as well. It also lets the FCC, the United States government, know just how many wireless microphone users are really out there. When they first started this back in 2005, 6, planning for that first auction, they went and pulled the number of licenses. At that point in time, only broadcasters could apply for licenses. So there were a couple hundred licenses in the U.S., and they said, well, this isn't going to affect anyone. There's only a couple hundred wireless microphone users. Well, the reality was, no, there's millions of wireless microphone users. But it gives you a little bit of protection in some different areas, and we'll address that later. There's ways to do it. There's a company called Professional Audio Wireless. There's a gentleman there who will help you navigate the paperwork and everything. It's relatively inexpensive. I've heard it's around $1,000 to apply for it. It's good for 7 years, but it will give you a lot of benefit and protection and moving for that. Jeff is over here taking selfies, of y'all. So that's a kind of a zoomed in image of what I'm talking about with that guard band and that duplex gap, which is 614, 616, which is only unlicensed or licensed users there. 657 to 63 is unlicensed, but you see there's that sliver 653 to 657 there where only licensed users can operate. Now, all this said, don't think it's a good idea to plan on operating in these areas right now. Because what we don't know is what the signal strength of the mobile broadband is going to be and how that's going to affect the RF noise floor in those areas. It may or may not be you may not be able to operate in there because the noise floor is so high. We really won't know until we get there. But it may open up a little bit of extra spectrum in the area for some other people. So basically, these are the areas where wireless microphone users will still legally be allowed to operate. So we have some other options besides UHF. VHF has always been there. In Dallas-Fort Worth, you may not know this, but Channel 8 is actually the only TV station that transmits on a VHF channel. 4, 5, 11, 13 all actually use UHF channels.
Really?
Yeah, but they keep their old number because it's their brand. But they made a transition years ago to UHF area. So there's actually 6 empty TV stations that we can use microphones in the VHF area. And we sell QLX digital and ULX digital in VHF. Now, there are some things about being in VHF that are different than UHF to consider, but it's a good option for people with fixed installations. The antenna are different. Obviously, they're much larger because of the larger waveforms. There's a higher noise floor in the VHF area that has to be overcome, but when you're in a building that should be attenuating some of those RF signals, there's definitely some options to go in there. And like I said, we do have 2 products which you're familiar with, the ULX digital and the QLX digital, that operate in VHF. Of course, UHF is still open if there's an empty TV channel, which we'll have a couple around here to operate in, possibly more depending on the signal strength of the TV stations. There's this band from 902 to 928, which we manufacture. QLX digital, ULX digital, and Axient digital will be available in that band as well. It's unlicensed. We recommend scanning in that band before you go to use it, but it does give you a little bit more area. There's a lot of other technologies that share that space. We have the decked band, which is 1.9 gigahertz. We have a whole line of conferencing microphones called the Microflex Wireless products that work in that band. Now, one trade-off in that band is the way that you have to use that spectrum in a spread spectrum device. They have to be able to hop and some other stuff. So the technology as it is now, there's an increased latency for devices in that area. So like our MXW systems that we use for conferencing products and wireless like that, there's about 17 milliseconds of latency. In a video conferencing application, that's no big deal because my video's got more latency than that. But in a performance situation, 17 milliseconds is unacceptable. But it is a place that we can move other wireless microphone users away from the UHF band. For example, if you had a boardroom here or a room like that you wanted to do wireless microphones in for video conferencing, instead of crowding the congested UHF area, maybe you look at a product like that gets it away from the TV channel mess and puts it in that other band, right? 2.4 gigahertz, of course, is what? Wi-Fi. There's wireless microphone systems that work in Wi-Fi. We have a new GLXD Advanced system that we're moving towards lots of smaller churches, schools, what I call the band guy that needs 2 or 3 or 4 wireless microphones, and they're going to go from this venue to this venue, be it a church or a bar, and you can actually operate some microphones there. For the professional level users, don't really recommend that in larger environments like this, but if you had auxiliary classrooms or other areas around here, that might even be an option to put a few more microphones into. And then we also have this other area up here that's reserved exclusively for licensed users. We can do Axient Digital up in that area as well. That does require a Part 74 license, though. So there's some other areas. This slide kind of shows a little bit of the different types of products that we have, and those are the names of those bands there. Also, they have opened up 1.43 to 1.52 gigahertz for wireless microphones, and also 5 gigahertz. Of course, 5 gigahertz corresponds to Wi-Fi, so we'll have the same issues there we have with 2.4. But the 1.4 to 1.5 gigahertz area could be something that we develop microphones to. Now, that will require a Part 74 license, once again, to operate in that area. So for those that can get Part 74 licenses, we highly, highly recommend doing that, just as a protection for yourself, really. You're probably familiar with the buyback programs that are going on right now from Shure, Sennheiser. Okay, so...
I am.
Right. So I'll talk about it for everyone. So all the major microphone manufacturers right now, including Shure, Sennheiser, AKG, etc., are doing buyback programs where you can trade in wireless product that's affected by the auction. In other words, if you have a wireless microphone product that can tune into the range that was affected, which is anywhere basically from 614 to 698 megahertz, you can send it back to Shure or whomever against the purchase of a new product, and we'll give rebate for those new wireless systems. So, for example, we're doing a $500 rebate on Axient Digital and ULX Digital quads and dual channel receivers. So if you send back a system, which has to be a transmitter and receiver, you get $500 per channel on these products. So if I buy a...
And it doesn't matter what
you send back. That's right. You can send back a $79 Radio Shack unit that was purchased in 1985. If it tunes into that spectrum, it is very important. And it doesn't matter, like I said, how much it cost or the manufacturer that was. As long as it can tune anywhere into that affected range, we'll take it back on the rebate. So, for example, on a 4-channel ULX Digital quad receiver or Axient Digital quad receiver with 4 transmitters, if you send back 4 systems, that's $500 times 4. That's $2,000 back per unit. So you can go to our website, wirelessrebate.shure.com, and we show the amounts for all the different wireless products that you can trade back in. You'll notice that for the most part, it's all digital wireless, and we'll talk a little. Single ULX Digital is $250. QLX Digital is $250 as well. PSM 1000 is $500 a channel. PSM 900 is $250 a channel. I think we're doing $100 back on GLXD Advanced and PSM 300, and I think it's $50 back on the BLX systems, which is our entry-level analog wireless that you find at retail shops like Guitar Center, etc.
And so, if I understand it right, it's $100 for the transmitter, $400 on the ULX and Axient, $100 on the transmitter, $400 on the receiver.
Basically, if we break it out, it can be broken out like that, but since you have to send back a complete system, you can't send back transmitters a la carte.
Gotcha.
So you have to return a system, which means 1 receiver, 1 transmitter, and buy a system, which means at least 1 transmitter and 1 receiver. If you had a combo system, you would only be able to get credit back on, 2 of those things. It'd still be $500. Now, that being said, you can send back an in-ear monitor system against the purchase of a wireless microphone system. We don't care. You can send back a microphone system and buy an in-ear monitor transmitter system and receiver. We don't care. It's just got to be a wireless system, and that's another misconception as well. In fact, I'm doing a couple things with a couple churches in the area where they're wanting to upgrade their ears, and they have some old analog wireless, and they're using that against the purchase of PSM 1000 systems. So we can definitely do that.
The discount is on the product you buy.
That is correct. It is based on what you buy, not what you send back. So like we always say, it could be a $79 system that someone bought in 1993 at Radio Shack, and you can trade it back against.
I'm serious.
No, they don't test it.
We have the sure reps on record.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to work.
As long as at one time it could tune into anywhere in that chunk of the spectrum.
And that will be written because that's an FCC thing.
It has to be stickered.
So yeah, right.
Right.
Give us those exact bottom and top.
So 614. 616 is the magic number.
698.
To 698. 616 to 698. If it can tune anywhere in that range. Now, if it only tunes between 653 and 663, technically you can't because of that duplex gap thing. However, there's not a system on there out in the market that is stuck in between 653 and 663.
It doesn't have to reside wholly in that 616 to 698. If it's like 570 to 616 and it can tune into 1 megahertz, then that qualifies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just got to touch it at any point in time. There's a chart on if you go to wirelessrebate.shure.com, there's a chart that you can actually go in and put the manufacturer and the model in there and the frequency band, and it'll tell you if it qualifies or not. And it'll even suggest the most comparable Shure product. Doesn't mean that you have to buy that Shure product. It just gives you like what the most comparable product would be to that one that you're interested in trading back.
Actually, when I did put it out there to our forums, there were, what is the next level under the ULX that is, great quality, that could be a part of, and it sounds like every
QLXD would be the next.
QLXD, correct.
Okay, and that has a rebate program.
$250 per channel.
And it doesn't come in a dual or a quad?
That's correct, and does not have Dante on it. It's the same codec, actually, so you can take a QLX digital transmitter and it will work with a ULX digital receiver and vice versa. That's how similar they are. There's some things that the ULX digital, especially duals and quads, have that QLX digital does not have. The Dante high density mode is probably the most significant difference. QLX digital does not have high density mode. ULX digital does. So does Axient digital. I'm going to talk about high density mode. So that is a significant difference. Also, it only comes in a half rack unit. No Dante. No high power mode, which ULX Digital and Axient Digital both have high power modes for the transmitters as well. There's some other little differences, like a QLX Digital receiver by itself doesn't provide what's called DC bias, so it can't power an active antenna on its own. It needs an antenna distributor or something like that to provide the DC bias to do so, whereas a ULX Digital receiver, Axient Digital receiver, does have DC bias on the antenna line and can power active devices like the active paddle antennas and stuff like that straight from the receiver. Yeah. So that's the buyback program. Like I said, if you really have any questions, you can ask me. For those that are watching this via video, you go to wirelessrebate.shure.com, and it's very well laid out online this time around. In 2009, we were still using faxes and paperwork to do all this, and everything is done electronically. So basically the way it works, if anyone's curious, is you decide what you have that you want to send back. You buy Shure product from an authorized Shure reseller. You take your receipt, you go online to the website, you fill out your information, what you're sending back, you cut out the UPC codes from the new product, you put that in a box with your old product and copies of your receipts from an authorized reseller, and you send that back to Shure. They'll have you in the system already because of the form you'll fill out and submit online now, so you have to send in the paperwork with it. And you wait 6 to 10 weeks and you get a check from Shure.
Yeah.
So pretty simple. Yeah. And that ends April 30th of 2018. So you can buy your wireless now. You really have up until April 30th to put all that stuff in a box and send it back out. So you could buy things now or in January and February, continue using the other wireless products until, April 30th, 2018.
Dealing with misconceptions, maybe myths that are out there, because in our world, everybody thinks they know everything definitively, but we hear different things. right now, it is perfectly legal. You will not get fined if you're using the 614, 696 spectrum. Is that correct?
That is correct. Until a 600 megahertz mobile broadband company turns on services in that area.
Now,
Even to begin testing.
Even to begin testing.
and that is on us to figure out. Now, is it on that company that fires up into that, let's just say it's T-Mobile, to let us know?
No.
How would,
Can you explain, Clayton, the time frame of Dallas-Fort Worth being April 2019? Are they allowed to begin testing prior to that?
yeah,
They can only begin testing in areas that they got in the auction as if there's not a TV station currently there. So what that means in Dallas-Fort Worth is there's a lot of TV stations in the 600 megahertz area. There's really nowhere for them to test unless one of those TV stations goes off air or moves early, which actually T-Mobile is working with Fox and some other companies and trying to help subsidize the movement of TV stations early. And so in New York City, Fox is moving a whole year ahead of schedule, which will open up room for them to begin operating their services. And that point, it's just up to us to kind of know. Now, one way you would know is if you had a scanning device.
and that's where the 85 dB comes into place. You're considered not to have a TV station in your terrestrial area if that signal is below 85. Is that
Under the new rules, that is correct.
okay?
That's correct. Doesn't matter what the signal strength of the mobile broadband is in 600 megahertz. Once they start testing in an empty TV channel in 600 megahertz, regardless of their signal strength, you have to vacate.
So so if you're in a fall off terrestrial zone,
Mhm.
then you really have to think about it. But as long as we're probably in a zone where a TV station is. I know we are because I've already scanned, but.
Mhm.
So we don't have much to worry about because the testing part that can't start
Until those
until
TV
that
stations
TV
move.
station.
Yeah. And as TV stations move, we will be updating Sure's website, and there'll be other websites too that'll indicate. And I have all the information on where everyone's moving to.
Okay.
Collected, I can tell you, like I said, I know that in Dallas-Fort Worth we'll have 15 and 17 open, 20 and 26 are low powers. I mean, I can tell you what station 34 is going to move to 25 or whatever it is. I have all that info collected.
Right.
You know,
We
when
have-
they do it, though, we're just supposed to know.
No, I get it. That's a little tough because
It is.
even because the people it affects the most are the people most likely not to have the tools.
Is that hard help? Is that scanner in my bag? I didn't bring it. Okay.
I've got mine now.
You got yours? Okay.
Good.
In your car? Yeah, go grab that. We'll show that to them. I want to show y'all a device that's about $300 called RF Explorer, handheld RF scanner. It can actually save information into its software that's free from the company that makes it, and we can actually export a CSV file of that into Wireless Workbench.
Oh,
So
cool.
it's got some compatibility there as far as that goes. But that would be one way to know, because you'll know when you see it on there, you know.
Okay. We have probably in our network of our circle of influence several thousand churches. A lot of them will be a rural area church
Mhm.
that may fall into that.
Right. They may not have to worry about it.
Zone.
Yeah.
Well, they're the ones that would have to worry about
More
this.
with T-Mobile. They'll have to worry about more about T-Mobile. So yeah, so just to speak to that, if you're in a rural area outside of a major market for TV stations, such as Dallas-Fort Worth, there's probably a lot of empty TV stations already there. There's probably a lot of empty TV stations in 600 megahertz. In fact, that's where T-Mobile is deploying now already. Wyoming, West Texas, rural Virginia. I've seen a chart of it. They're already turning on services right now as we speak. So if you have 600 megahertz stuff, you need to vacate that area.
And
Now the
it's
advantage.
to figure that out.
That's right. Now the advantage for the rural areas is that when they just really have to get out of 600 megahertz because there's lots of spectrum available in the remaining UHF band that will not be TV stations in. So that's an advantage for rural users. Disadvantage for urban users, primarily people in markets like Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, New York, Chicago, et cetera, is that when you get out of 600 megahertz, there's not a lot of options to go to. And you have to think very carefully about the product that you have today, not only not being in 600 megahertz, but also being in a part of the UHF band that's going to be usable for you if you're in a major market. And that's another part about this whole thing that people are kind of glancing over when they read about it online. It's just, I got to get out of 600 megahertz. And they forget about the TV stations repacking and in congested TV areas. And I've watched TV over the air in Dallas-Fort Worth. I don't know who's watching The Lone Ranger at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday, but they're on the air showing old reruns of The Lone Ranger, and we got to get out of their way, you know. So that's the bottom line there.